I think in terms of achieving the timetable, the government's deadline for July is a realistic one, but I think that within that, some of the key milestones as far as times are concerned perhaps need reviewing within that. So, for example, there is only a 2-week window from the deadline for approval of compliance schemes to the deadline for producers to sign up to compliance schemes. So I think what as REPIC we would advocate, and certainly a number of other stakeholders that we've spoken to have said, within that time frame we really ought to look for some sort of pre-approval process so that a lot of the legwork of scheme compliance can be done, and then really subject to formal ratification once the regulations are transformed. I think it is, and again, at the launch of this last consultation, the DTI did acknowledge that another formal consultation was required because the regulations as now drafted are substantially different from the prior consultation, and therefore it makes a great deal of sense that they're consulted on again. So I think it's very justifiable, and hopefully we'll reach the right conclusions. Well, we obviously need both of them. In terms of DCFs, again, it's an issue of clarity and one of timing. It's absolutely clear that we need a proper and adequate DCF infrastructure, and the sooner that we can get that, and the sooner there's an understanding of that, then the compliance schemes, the recycling industry, everyone that's involved in the physical aspects of collecting and reprocessing Weee can actually get about making some firm contracts. So we need the DCF, and again, DCF network. Again, what I would try to stress is that within this, what appears to be a year's time frame from the launch of the latest consultation to the full implementation of producer responsibility, within that we need to bring back some of the spade work activity of trying to get DCFs established early, getting producers registered with schemes, making sure that there's a sufficient network of approved treatment facilities. So anything that we can do to address the major aspects of approval for those ahead of the regulations being enforced, we should do. Yes, it will, is my belief. There isn't an option. We're already, as a country, later than just about everyone else. It's an EU directive. The UK government has to transpose it. But I think that the delays that the government has announced as we've gone through this process have been justified on the basis that it's better to get this, what is a very complex directive, implemented properly, albeit a little late, rather than attempt to implement it on time and risk getting it wrong. It's too early to say that at the moment. As I'm sure you'll appreciate, REPIC is a fairly large and complex organisation in itself. We have 60 or so members, many of them very big multinational corporations, and acting as a not-for-profit organisation and a very democratic one, we do feed out the documentation to the members for comments, and we've actually got a deadline in the next few days to receive those back from members. But as REPIC as an organisation, we're working through it. We see in there, and again in discussions with other stakeholder groups, a lot of what's been talked about with the DTI and others over the last few months seems to have been taken on board in the latest regulations, draft regulations and consultation documentation. But there are one or two issues where there are, I think, areas for concern, and the one that would probably leap to mind most easily is the one around evidence and provision of evidence notes. The two-stage process that's being suggested, I'm struggling to see how that can be a workable solution, and we'll be looking to come up with some constructive proposals to revert back to the government on how that could work in a different way. Well, they shouldn't do. Any local authority that elects to have its sites operate as a DCF, I think if you, it depends, the local authorities have a choice whether to be a DCF or not. And if they understand their economic model, and if they work through the process, they can determine whether or not it will be cost effective for them to become a DCF. So there's the potential for some loss of revenue, for example, from scrap metal, from the large whites that currently go into the light iron scrap containers. but there's a cost saving for them in that they won't have to treat hazardous waste materials such as TVs, fridges and freezers, and there's the obvious saving in landfill costs as product gets diverted away. So I think there's an economic balance. Couple that with the fact that the retailers, in order to set up the DCF infrastructure, will finance some of the upgrade costs for local authorities, and I think they ought to be looking at this at least on a cost neutral basis. It's an interesting question. I mean, there's a clear delineation between historic and future Weee, and the issue of historic Weee brings with it real difficulties for the producer community. A lot of the product that will come back over the next few years will be from producers that no longer exist, and that's I think a legacy that's recognised. There is provision within the directive in Article 8.3 for producers to show the costs of recycling historic Weee. And I think many of them, in fact most of them, are in favour of that as a route to recover those costs. I think however you look at it, there is a cost associated with the Weee directive, and the real question is, should that be made visible or should it be simply included in the price? And I think there is a growing belief and a growing opinion from a number of stakeholder groups now that in fact making that visible is probably a good thing.